Help us to consider this 37th Psalm. We ask that you'll open our eyes, open our ears, and open our hearts so that we may see, hear, and understand your word. We pray in the name of Yeshua. Amen. Tuesday, we went through the first 8 Psalms, and we stopped at the 8th Psalm.
First 8 verses.
The first 8 verses, yeah, I'm sorry. The 37th Psalm, we went through the first 8 verses. We finished the 8th verse, but I kind of want to just touch on it right quick and then go into verse 9 to kind of give how they kind of fold together. But verse 8 says, "Cease from anger and forsake wrath. Fret not yourself. It tends only to evil doing." Now, last week we talked about the dangers of anger, and the dangers of depression, and the dangers of, I guess, negative emotions that kind of pull us away from our walk with Elohim. But verse 9 says, "For evildoers shall be cut off, but those that wait for Yehovah, they shall inherit the land." Now, verse 9 is reinforcing what we read in verse 8, which tells us to stop being angry. Find a means to forgive, not just those who have wronged you, but forgive yourself as well. And ultimately, don't allow yourself to fall into the emotions which breed self-condemnation, which are depression, anxiety, fear, because these only breed evil doing. In other words, things that are injurious to yourself and are displeasing to Elohim. Now, verse 9 goes on to tell us that these things will cause us to be separated from Yehovah, while those who wait, the word is kavah, the ones who look for, hope for, expect, and look eagerly for Yehovah Elohim will be yarash. They will inherit, take possession of, and succeed in the land, which is our domain. We will prosper, and otherwise, in our lives. Now, we move into verse 10. And verse 10 in this psalm is marked with a vav. Most modern Bibles don't have the letters marked on these verses. You just simply see the verse. But this one is marked with a vav before it starts. And it says, "And yet a little while, and the wicked," let's start that again, "and yet a little while, and the wicked is no more. Yea, you shall look well at his place, and he is not." A little while is the word me'at, which means to become small and diminish. We ask, what's going to become small and diminish? And we see that it's rasha. The wicked are going to diminish. This is a wickedness against Elohim, and one that is condemned, which is another meaning of rasha. It means to condemn. But before we go on, let's look at the word rasha, so we can get an idea of what wickedness is. And it's something as simple as this. You know, we see wickedness as bank robbers and train robbers and murderers and all this other stuff. But true wickedness, if we consider rasha, true wickedness begins with the ayin, begins with perception. Perception. What are we perceiving? We're perceiving the authority, there's the resh, in shin. Now, why would that be important? What does that have to do with wickedness? We look at the shin. The shin itself, there's 2 sides of shin. And if we look at 2 sides of shin, we have to consider that the front side of shin is Elohim's point of view, whereas the other side of shin is our carnal and fleshly point of view as it is enticed by the Satan. Now we've said it's Satan's point of view. And in the sense of the word, it is Satan's point of view. Satan can't be everywhere at one time. He can't know the thoughts in our minds, but he can sure wave the things out in front of us that entice the carnal being away from a relationship with Elohim. And we saw that last week, or not last week, but we saw that, I guess in the 25th Psalm, in the word, well, if I can spell it right, oyed, that it is the flesh. It is the flesh. This is a word for enemy, oyed. That it's the flesh that separates us from the truth that's in the house, and it separates us from Yehovah Elohim. That is our enemy. You know, we talk about, oh, the devil has me down and all this other stuff. We have to come to the realization that it's not the devil that's knocking you down.
Right.
Okay? All Satan is doing is waving things in front of you that you have the choice
Our choices.
to say no to, or you have the choice to succumb to. And when we look at the word Rasha, we understand that this is how we perceive either the French side of Shin, or do we perceive the backside of Shin. And if we are in the backside of Shin, as we'll see as we go on in our study, that when we are living on the wrong side of Shin, then we have issues with separation from Elohim. Anyway, let's see, where were we? The next phrase says that they are no more, which is expounded on in the balance of this verse, beginning with the word beyin, which means to perceive, discern, observe, understand, and diligently consider. And we note in the verse that it is Elohim who is doing this. It is the wicked he is considering. However, we go back to the word for wicked in Rasha and ask, are they considering his authority, or are they considering their own authority? Okay? And this is something that we ask ourselves in our lives, because every day, we get into a circumstance where we have to make this decision. Sometimes we decide to stick it out on the right side of Shin, but there's a lot of times that we end up making the wrong decision and get on the back side of Shin. So, he is also considering where they are, and the word is mekom, which means a standing place. And it says, and you shall look well at his place, that Elohim will look and see where they are. Mekom means a standing place. Where do they stand? And it's a question for us to ask ourselves, where do I stand in my relationship with Elohim? Now, we talk about separation. We've talked about that we have our lifetime to make the right decision, to walk with Elohim in our lives, so that in the end, he will say, come on in, instead of saying, depart from me, I never knew you. Another name for Yehovah Elohim is Makom, which means the place. He is the place. And it gives us an idea that we are in him and he is in us. And it opens our eyes to the idea or the concept of Zimzum, where he opened up a space within himself to allow creation to take place. And we exist within that pocket that he created. We exist within him. If we don't get our relationship right, and he says, depart from me, I never knew you. Well, where are we going to go? Are we still going to exist within him? Or are we going to be placed outside of that pocket in the total and complete absence of Yehovah Elohim? And that's something that we have to understand, is that being placed outside is a total and complete absence of the light. It's a total and complete absence of Elohim. And in a sense, he's saying, I never knew you. We don't have a relationship with him. So depart from me, you workers of iniquity. So when we don't love him enough to keep his word, when we don't love him enough to believe and receive what he gave us in his salvation, Yehoshua, and we don't come into his covenant, then we are going to be set outside. The root of mekom is kum, which means to rise up, stand, and be established. So this brings up another question. Are we going to be raised up within that place? Which brings us back to, what side of Shin are we going to be on? And to be on the wrong side of Shin is to allow anger to take over, to allow depression to take over, to allow anxiety to take over, to allow any of these harmful, negative emotions to take over, to draw our joy away from Elohim. We talk about these things now during the counting of the Omer, because when we come to Rosh Hashanah, we want to have a level head. And especially this time, because Rosh Hashanah this year is the Shemitah. It's the 7th year. It's the year where the slaves are set free, debts are forgiven, the land is allowed to rest. We need to get a hold of where our emotions are now, so that we can let go, like we learned in the plagues. Let the people go. Let go of those darkened, dim perceptions that keep us angry, that keep us overwhelmed, that keep us down. So the question to ask is, am I going to be raised up? Where's my relationship? Is he going to ask me to enter in and raise me up? Or is he going to ask me to depart because he never knew me? Now the last verse says, he is not. Elohim sees and diligently considers all aspects of a person. If a person is found to be Rasha, consistently Rasha, like I say, we go through states of Rasha on a regular basis. Do we make teshuvah or do we not make teshuvah? Do we turn around or do we stay where we are? But if a person is found to be Rasha, he will not stand in the presence of Elohim. This is the wages of sin. In this case, yielding fully to the carnal nature instead of the nature of Elohim. Everybody with me? Okay. Verse 11. But the humble shall inherit the land and delight themselves in the abundance of peace. In this verse, we see the other side of Shin, the reward for humility and the day-to-day walk with Elohim. The humble shall yaresh, inherit. The word yaresh also means take possession of and occupy. What is it that becomes possessed and occupied? Eretz, the land. Eretz represents our domain, our life, and how it proceeds by being in the right relationship with Yehovah Elohim. We understand here that we have to take possession of our life, and we have to fill it. You know, we see in Genesis where we're told to be fruitful and multiply. It is our responsibility to be fruitful, and that doesn't mean just bearing progeny. It means being fruitful in what we do. That our garden, and we'll talk about the garden in a minute, but that our initial responsibility was to take care of the garden. And if we imagine that we are again within the garden, that we live every day within Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, our responsibility is to tend that garden, and in the process, be the delight of Elohim. Now, what do we fill it with? According to the verse, we fill it with delight and abundance. Both come from Elohim, in whose pleasure it is to provide us. The word for peace is shalom, which means completeness and contentment. We become complete. And because we become complete, we become content. The root of this word is shalom, which means to be in covenant with, and specifically to be in a covenant of peace. So if we are in a covenant with Yehovah Elohim through Yeshua HaMashiach, we understand that Yeshua shed his blood at the Tav, at the covenant marker, and that blood was a representation of Elohim. It was a representation of the sin and the substitute for us, and it was also a representation of the blood of humankind, which was required. So all three, I guess, types of blood were represented at the covenant. In the covenant, everybody would cut their little thumb open and spill blood on the stone or whatever, and they would mingle it and saying that we are now one. And if we understand that is what Yeshua did, then we are one with Elohim, we are one with his word and salvation, and it is our responsibility to accept that covenant or to reject that covenant. And again, if we accept that covenant, it says that we have delight and we have peace, we have shalom. And verses 10 and 11 is an illustration of the Vav. That the Vav means two things. It means, on the one hand, it means the flesh, carnality, humankind on the sixth day. The sixth letter of the alphabet is the Vav. On the sixth day, humankind was created, so it represents humankind, you and I. But Vav also represents an attachment. So we have the choice to be carnal in our lives, like we saw in verse 10, or in verse 11, to attach ourselves to the covenant with Yehovah Elohim through Yehoshua HaMashiach and be his delight within the garden. Everybody with me? Okay. Don't ask me to repeat it. I can't remember any of that. Verse 12, Zion. The wicked plots against the righteous and gnashes at him with his teeth. In this verse, we get an introduction to the protection that we have in Elohim. The wicked plot, the word is zeman. It teaches us that and it's supposed to say their thought processes, not their though processes, but their thought processes are always scheming to deceive the righteous. There's a lot of people that we know that are always trying to come up with something to make sure that we understand that all that God stuff that you're looking at is a bunch of bunk. There's somebody in your life that is telling you you're not doing it right, you should be doing it like this, you should be doing it like that. And there's that little voice in your head that comes from the Satan that says, it's called temptation, that says, that might not be right. He's telling you the same thing he told the woman in the garden. Did Elohim not say? So there's always something plotting to turn us away. Where was I? Okay. Zimah means to have thoughts to devise and to be fixed upon. These thoughts are against the Zadik, the righteous and the just. This word also means the lawful. If we are righteous and if we are just and if we love Elohim, then like it says in 1 John, we love him because we keep his commandments. Now, does his commandments mean that we're under the thumb of the Torah? No, because if we read the Torah, it's not being under the thumb. It's simply paying attention to what Elohim has to tell us and walking humbly with him. But it goes on that we have people that try to dissuade us, and they come against us who are Zadakim. We are righteous. We are lawful. And this isn't self-righteousness. The root of this word is Zadak, which means the righteous of Elohim. We have the righteousness of Elohim within us if we believe and receive and maintain His word and salvation, which is